we are going to try to do it Memorial Day this year. And hopefully we'll be able to pull it off. We've looked into a few things. Of course, I'd like to, we'll make sure the word gets out, as far ahead of time as we can when we decide whether that's a go. At this point, I'd say it's about a 75% go, because I've got a lot of people that want me to do it, and frankly, we'd like to do it ourselves. That also, Nick also wanted me to mention that we did finish our cottage last year, Laurel Bank Cottage, and you can look at us on Laurel Bank Farm, either on Facebook or laurelbankfarm.com here in Stilesville. And we do rentals. We love to have friends rent it. My sister kind of runs that operation. It's a cottage that sleeps up to 5, sleeps 4 very, very comfortably. And the only things you need to bring besides yourself is your own food and drink. We supply everything else, right down to coffee, and most of the condiments in the refrigerator or the cupboards. It was all new last year, and I don't want to sound like I'm Tom Bodette here. But if somebody's looking for a couple of nights with a couple of friends or family, it's a great little joint. So you can get in touch with me or directly through Laurel Bank Farm in Stilesville.
Is it on the internet? Is it on the web?
It is on the web, yeah. Laurel Bank Farm.
Okay.
And we have a Facebook page, and we also have a web page.
Great.
There's a link to the web page in the announcement for this meeting. Oh,
good. Thank you, John. Thank you. So space is limited, and it also includes the access to the 500 feet of private access on the river. And you can eat all the farm fresh eggs you can eat, because the chickens are laying like crazy right now. So, but you can't eat the chickens. You can eat the dog. You can have the dog, but lots of eggs. So anyway,
get some llama hair to tying too.
You can llama hair, goat hair, whatever you need. Chicken feathers. So got a nice badger rooster. The bobcat wiped out the chickens last year, but we got a new flock. So, but anyway, well, let's kind of get rolling here. What we're gonna do, I'm gonna get up just a second because I forgot something. We're gonna tie one of my very, very, very favorite flies. We're gonna do a classic Sawyer pheasant tail nymph, and then we're going to maybe do it another way. And I'll put one in the vise here, and I'll switch views, and we'll talk a little bit about it while it's in the vise, when you can see it. I should have had him in there. We're just going to put him in here. We're getting some nice rain today, which I'm very, very happy about. We need it. Okay, can everyone see the pheasant tail here?
Yep, beautiful.
Beautiful shot, perfect.
This is a classic Sawyer pheasant tail, and by classic I mean this is dressed exactly as Frank Sawyer originally dressed these flies. Now, Frank Sawyer was a river keeper on the on the Hampshire Avon in England, and he was a late contemporary of Skews and so forth. But one of his jobs on the river as a river keeper was to try to eradicate the grayling. So what's this audio? Something going on here. And he, at that time, dry fly fishing was kind of what you did, but grayling are very susceptible to nymphs, and he developed this nymph to sink very quickly. This is one of the first weighted nymphs Skews nymphs were all made to be fished near the surface, almost exactly as a dry fly would have been. And then the take would have been very visible. But Sawyer needed to get down deeper. So in really a flash of fly tying brilliance, he discarded the traditional tying silk and used fine copper wire to tie the fly as the tying silk. So it became both the weight for the fly and the tying silk. This is, to me, this is, like I say, this is fly tying brilliance. I am a big advocate of very simple flies, and this is one of the simplest. It only uses two materials. So we will talk a little bit about that design, and we'll see it as we go along. Now, unfortunately, I mean, this is a really inexpensive fly to tie because it only uses pheasant, cock pheasant center tail fibers. So you don't have to have a lot of fancy materials. The issue we run into, though, is getting pheasant tail that is long enough. And you can see, I don't know if you can, how well that shows up for you, but this is about 2 inches long on this. It's very hard to find 2-inch long pheasant tail fibers. You can if you look enough, you look hard enough, but you really want to look for very, very long ones because we're only going to use 5 or 6 of these in order to tie the fly, and it's going to be the tails, the body, and the wing case. So we're going to need enough to produce that whole fly with just those few fibers. When I was tying commercially and so forth, I would literally buy pheasant tails 100 at a time. Now, 100 at a time, they're not that expensive. I used to get them for like a dime a piece. So, big deal. I'd buy $10 worth and I'd sort out of 100 prime, what they called prime, I would normally get about a dozen, maybe 10 or a dozen good ones. But I didn't care if I paid $1 a piece for them at that point. So do look for the longer ones. I don't have a really good source for them. I kind of get them where I can. If you know anyone who shoots, especially anyone who shoots in the Dakotas or the Midwest anywhere, be very nice to them and have them send you the center tails. The very best are from a 3-year-old bird. Almost, that's like shooting a pterodactyl. I mean, there just ain't that many of them around. They're right there with the passenger pigeons for rarity. But if you can get a good 2-year-old cock pheasant, generally they have pretty good center tails. So I'll switch back, and we will move back to the tying portion of this. Now, you can use a lot of different hooks, a lot of different hook models. Long ago, I settled on the Tiemco 3769. A little bit of flare in this. Let me see if I can get that out of there. I settled on the Tiemco 3769, which is really an excellent hook. There's some of the other manufacturers do an equivalent to this. They call it a medium wire. By today's standard, it's a fairly heavy wire hook. It has a very nice round bend. It's an extremely strong hook. It's been on the market for about 30 years, and I've been using it that entire time. I've tied them on many other hooks. The old Partridge L3A is an excellent hook. You can tie them on pretty much any hook you like. So you don't have to get too worried about that. Whatever you've got a good supply of. This is a size 14. I've tied them as small as 20s or even smaller, and as large as size 10s. The majority of the pheasant tails that I tie and fish are size 14s and 16s. 14s are going to cover most of your larger early season mayflies, especially the Hendrickson. Size 14 is just ideal size for Hendrickson nymph. And these pheasant tails are excellent Hendrickson suggestions. Little later in the season, some of the other flies, slightly larger flies. And then the size 16 is perfect for any of the sulfurs, any of the Western PMDs, and so on. And when I was fishing in the West a lot, I would go through the size 16s like popcorn, because they are just the right size for that Western PMD. They're the perfect size for the Eastern sulfur too. But you can adapt these. Don't be afraid to try different things. One thing that I don't really like too much though, some fly dressers will put them on curved hooks, and I've tried that, and I'm speaking from experience here. I've tried that. I don't find that they work any better. They probably don't work any worse, but I don't think they work any better, so I don't quite see the point to it. When nymphs are drifting, they're generally stretched out. So just a standard hook works pretty well. So let's get started. I said there's only a couple of materials, and the other material is fine copper wire. That's all it is. Sawyer originally used the wire from little electric motors that he'd find, and he would unwrap the wire in little electric motors. Let me just switch over here again. And I don't know how well I can't see that at all, but I just buy this stuff on a little spool like this. This is probably about, it's probably about 8 or 9 thousandths in diameter. Probably about equivalent to about 3x, if you will. You can find some computer wires that get down as small as 3 thousandths of an inch. I've tried those. Some of the heavier wires don't work very well, but what's great about this stuff is it's cheap. You could try a few different wires for like $1 a spool, and when you hit on the one that works, I actually find that this really cheap stuff from India is the best I've found in a long time. This just kind of really off-brand stuff. And what I'll do is I'll pull about. It takes about 7 or 8 inches to tie a fly. So I'll generally pull off a couple of feet, because I'll tie several flies from one length. So I'm going to just break off a piece of wire, and enough for a couple of flies, and just snap it off. And I'm going to start it on the hook, about an eye length behind the eye, and I'm going to be a little slippery, and I'm going to go over and catch it. You see that? Just like you'd start thread. Okay? Oh, you know what? I didn't do one thing here. I got to lift my. There we go. That's a lot better. So just like you'd start thread. And there's a trick on wire and tinsel in general. Don't trim fine wire with your scissors. Okay, now, I mean, the tendency would be to go in here now and snip that off. Well, that's going to dull your scissors over time, and it's going to wreck the points. So when we deal with wire, we're just going to fatigue it. We're just going to take it and we're going to wiggle it back and forth, and it'll eventually fatigue and pop off. So now I'm going to take a few more turns, and I'm going to build up a little football-shaped abdomen there. It's really neat. I should tie with a screen, because it's like having a super magnifying glass, isn't it? Super magnifiers. I'm going to build up just a little football-shaped thorax there. Okay, and this is going to provide the weight of the fly. And again, this fly is just such a brilliant design. It's going to provide not only the weight, but it's also going to give that more robust thorax. And then I'm going to go back to the bend in touching turns. right back. And I'm adding weight to the hook. And you can see I keep pulling the wire as I go to keep it straight. Almost every other turn or so, I pull the wire. And I got to get right back on this hook. I like to even just like I'm starting to go around the bend on this. Okay. You don't need a bobbin, you just let it hang. Okay. It's brilliant. So I'm going to click back to the other screen because we want to talk about the pheasant tail again. I'll use this one. Now, when you cut your fibers off this pheasant tail, there's a little trick. You see a lot of fly tires. I'm going to do it up here where I won't really use these fibers. I'll use them up to about here, and then this stuff up here, I'll just really don't use it. But there's a tendency, and I've seen people do this. You just trim them like this. And what happens is now when you bring them together, the tips don't line up. Okay, and we want nice even tails. There's a little trick. Hold the fibers at a right angle to the center stem. Okay, can you see what I'm doing there? You see these fibers right here?
Hey, put it back to your right more where your dark window is.
Can you see that? Can you see that? Where is it better?
Keep going to your right. You know your window behind you?
This way?
No, the other way.
The other way.
Yeah, now hold it up a little higher. There you go.
Okay. See how these are I've pulled these to right angles to the stem. You see that?
Yep.
See these guys there? Okay, so when I cut these, I'm going to hold them just like that. I got to get my head down, I'm sorry. And I'm going to cut 6 of these. And you want to count for consistency. So the fly's always, and I'm going to cut them really close to the center stem, and I'll make sure that I've got 6. Okay, and I'm just going to squeeze them together. And then when I pull them all together, you'll see that they pretty much all line up, just like that. You see the, oops, see the tips? You'll have to take my word for it. They'll show up a little better over here with the other camera. Okay, is that, oops, I gotta remember to do these things. Okay, and you see those are lined up pretty well. Actually, they're not lined up well enough at all. I'm a picky fly tire.
The fish really care?
You know what? They don't, but I do. They don't. There was, I don't know if you guys know this, but you know, I was at the what's called the ICAST show, the last one they held in 2019, which is the world's largest fly fishing show, or world's largest tackle show, and there's a fly fishing component to it. And there was a guy showing a new phone app that everybody was really excited about. And I'll make this, I'll make this brief, but essentially you just put this app on your phone, and, with GPS and the weather services and everything else, you get, all you had to do was just punch in, just essentially what river you were on, and it would do all the coordinates and everything, and it would tell you what was the best thing to use. But the guy couldn't sell the thing because the answer was always the same. Always said worms. So that's the joke for the.
Where the squirmy wormy came from?
Squirmy wormy, yeah, yeah. That came from Europe. So I'm going to start this, and I'm going to start to mount it on my side, okay, of the hook, and I'm going to catch it with one turn, and I'm going to kind of humor this around a little bit, so I can. It's a little too short, so I can go back and I can readjust that. I'm going to just get another bunch. I'm sorry. It's got to be right. You know, when you tie flies and you pause and interrupt between every, you know, makes it a little tougher. There's a flow to it. There, now those are straight. Okay, so I'm just going to catch that with a turn. Check for length. Length is good. I'm going to take another turn, and those look pretty good. But I'm going to take these and I'm going to pull them up a little bit, so they're kind of where they want to be on the hook. Okay, there we are. So there's our tails. Now all I'm going to do, this is the tricky part. I've got to hold now you can put a pair of hackle pliers on your wire if you want, or some other things. Sawyer advocated twisting the fibers together with the wire. But I kind of do it differently. I put a lot of tension on the wire so that it doesn't start to loosen up. And then I take my fingers and I just wrap like that, right up to behind the thorax. And then I bring my wire about 5 turns up as a rib. You can see I'm switching hands from one to the other. And then I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to bring that up to behind the eye and continue with a couple of good turns over the thorax. You can see that thorax kind of magically appearing there. And when I get up here, I'm going to pull this up tight. This is kind of a tricky part here. I'm going to pull this up tight, and I'm going to gather the hurls or the fibers here with one turn, and I'm going to take a turn back, and then I'm going to take a turn forward. I'm going to bring my fibers over the top, take a turn all the way around. Okay, that just made my wing case. I'm going to take another turn back till I get right to the back. Then I'm finally going to pull this over, and I'm going to take 2 turns to hold that, and then bring my wire forward, take 1 turn, and then to finish it off, I'm just going to go in there and just do a half hitch. And get my little tweezers here. I didn't pull enough wire off just do a half hitch, and then you can do another half hitch. You can't really whip finish this wire. And just pull that through. Oops. Come on. I didn't pull off enough wire is what I didn't do, so I'm struggling here a little bit at the end. I'll just do another one and we'll do it faster here. Come on. There we are. And then I'm just going to twitch that off, just pull it till it pops, and it'll break underneath. And then basically only the second time I'm going to pick up my scissors, I'm going to take all these, pull them really tight, and just snip that with the scissors. And there's a finished pheasant tail.
Beautiful.
And I can just kind of move that around, and that's how simple that is. And if you want to make these really sturdy, just take a drop of super glue, just dollar store super glue. There it is. And you just don't glue your fingers together. And you can take just a little drop on your dubbing needle. It's really funny. I'd never seen anyone do this until I saw Oliver Edwards do it in one of his videos. But I'd never seen anyone super glue these pheasant tails like that. But there he is. There's your finished pheasant tail. Do you want to see that again in fast motion? Anybody want to see? You want to see it again, or is that good? I can
I
do.
got that answer.
Hey, we got it, but I got a couple of questions that probably this is a good spot to ask. One, I noticed you don't counter wrap the wire.
Nope.
That's one. And the second one is really a question. You can oftentimes get, admittedly, maybe not 3-inch long barbules, but you can oftentimes get pheasant tail dyed in various colors. Do you find that depending on what species of trout or time of the year, that you have any preference for it, or fish don't give it?
That is an absolutely great question. I'm not trying to be patronizing by saying that. I used to go to great lengths to get different colors. I've used some that were dyed like a chestnut red. I've also used some that were bleached and dyed, like a very light olive. You can dye a pheasant tail darker olive. The only ones I've ever used that I found actually made a difference are black dyed pheasant tails. And I think they work well at suggesting some of the smaller stoneflies and darker nymphs. Other than that, I don't, again, I kind of keep this simple. I don't really, I don't see any disadvantage, but I also don't see a distinct advantage in, getting into the other, other colors. And this is kind of again, it's really great that we've got this level of magnification available. If you look at this just tied with the natural pheasant tail, if you look at it up close, you can see all the little fuzzy barbules. You can see the different colors of the pheasant tail in there. You can see how the darker center of the pheasant tail, you see that darker center here, creates the dark wing case. And this is all done with one simple, feather. And again, I believe that's a big part of the brilliance of this fly. So.
Did you ever meet Sawyer?
No, Sawyer was a little bit, he died in 1977. He was a little bit before my time. I've met and fished with people who knew him quite well. And they said he was just a really great guy. He's somebody I'd really, his book Nymphs and the Trout is really worthwhile reading. It's been published in several editions, and it's not hard to find. But what's great about Sawyer's book, it's one of those books where if you're not familiar with the English chalk streams, some of the language may be a little unfamiliar. But the general observations on trout that Sawyer has, they pretty much work everywhere. And it's one of those books that I've read it probably a half dozen or more times, and I know that every time I'm going to continue to read it. I know that any time I read it in the future, I'm going to learn something from it, or at least say, wow, I've seen that, and that's why. One of the things that Sawyer is famous for is what he calls the induced take. Actually, he didn't call it the induced take. Oliver Kite called it the induced take. There's a little bit of story there. Oliver Kite was a retired colonel, retired British Army colonel, who, because of a heart condition, devoted the what he had left of his life to fishing, and he happened to move in literally across the street from Sawyer. And at first, Sawyer and Kite were good friends, but Kite essentially absorbed everything he could from Sawyer. Now Sawyer, this also goes to the class system in England. And Sawyer was a working man. He was a blue collar guy. He was he was a river keeper. These guys are just he's a working stiff. Where Kite was a retired major. He had an excellent record of service. Had a little bit of money and a lot of connections. So Sawyer, who was evidently very shy, never promoted himself, where Kite starts to promote himself and everything he's learned from Sawyer. So there's a lot of rivalry there.
When you're done, I'll do it for an hour before I go walk.
What's that?
Oh, no, you're kidding me.
Hey, guys, mute.
So there became quite a rivalry there, but Kite was also he had a lot to do with bringing this type of fly to a larger audience. So it's kind of a neat story in the in the history of fly fishing. And Kite died quite young. He was, I think, in his 50s when he passed away. So, but Kite also had a television program, and you can get, if you Google Oliver Kite or you go on YouTube, there's some great video of Kite and of Sawyer. I know there's one called where Sawyer ties a pheasant tail and Sawyer catches a trout, and there's also a couple of really good ones with Kite on YouTube. So you can find those if you're kind of interested in this stuff. So I'll take another. So this folks is the first. These are the first flies I've tied since last August. So.
So Sawyer, we all use this fly to catch trout, but Sawyer developed it for grayling?
Developed it primarily for grayling, because one of his jobs, at that time, grayling were considered a nuisance, a trash fish, and he had to eradicate them. Part of his job was to eradicate the grayling. And he found that the quickest way to get rid of grayling was to catch them on nymphs. But the trout liked him too. And he was very, again, part of it was because he was shy by nature. Part of it was because most of the anglers that came to fish on the Avon, which was private, of course, private water and very expensive, were a very different social class than he was. So he kind of kept this idea of the weighted nymph to himself. He thought, this is all he needs is people, calling him a poacher or something. And but he had a patron, and the guy's name had a wonderful name. His name was Sir Grimwood Mears, and Sir Grimwood and Sawyer became very close. And after a while, Sawyer showed Mears what he was doing. And Mears, who was a friend of Skew's, wrote to Skew's and said, "You've got to see what this, at that time, young man has come up with." He says, this is really worth, this is really something to see. And which eventually Skew's invited Sawyer to visit him. They corresponded quite a bit, and he encouraged Sawyer to continue to experiment with the weighted nymphs. And that was, that was a big thing for Sawyer. It really kind of legitimized what he was doing. And I think, possibly without mirrors, these flies may have been kind of just, lost. So, little things like that, can, can have historical significance. There's probably no more universal fly than the pheasant tail. And you can see how easy they are. You can just knock them out really fast. There's probably no more universal fly than this. I mean, just it's one that almost everywhere I've fished, I've used it, and I've caught fish on it, and not just occasional fish, but it really is a fly that that I reach for. And at one point when I was fishing a lot of times I just go out with with a few pheasant tails in a little box, because I knew that's all I really needed. So, but do we still have some time left, guys?
Oh, yeah.
How are we doing for time?
Oh, yeah, you're fine. It's only quarter.
Okay, all right.
Don't worry about it.
When you fish with these, John, do you like to tie these on with a knot that's relatively tight, or do you use a non-slip mono loop kind of thing so the fly has a little more motion? Or it doesn't matter.
That's a good question, but I tie them with a standard clinch knot.
Yeah. Okay.
And I had started to go off on a tangent there talking about the induced take, but I think you guys know me well enough to know that once you get me talking, I don't stop. And I go down the rabbit hole on all these little stories and so forth. But the induced take is a big part of fishing these flies. I won't say properly, but the way that Sawyer intended them to be fished. And what the induced take is when you feel that the fly is near the fish. Now remember, Sawyer was fishing primarily for fish that he could see, and when he believed that the fly was near the fish, he would move the rod tip up a little bit, so the fly would move just a couple of inches, and the fish would see that movement and whack the fly. And there's a really good video by Oliver Edwards that you can get on YouTube. You can see on YouTube about fishing pheasant tails, and it shows it really, really well. The induced take method. And there was another one I saw, and I can't remember who it was by, but it was about fishing a chalk stream. And the photography was great. You can actually see when he induces the fly, you can see the fish just turn for it. But that's kind of the classic. The flies generally fish dead drift until you get to the point where you're going to lift, and a lot of that takes, to some degree, that takes a fair amount of practice, not so much skill, but practice. But you kind of have to develop an extra sense to know when that's going to happen. But it's part of the way these flies are fished. Now there's an American style, and most Americans know this version of the pheasant tail, and it's called a trough pheasant tail. Most Americans know it as the pheasant tail, but it's the trough pheasant tail. And Al Trough was a Western tyer. He was from New Jersey. He moved out west, I think, in the 60s to become a fishing guide and a bum. He's also the guy who came up with the elk hair caddis. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember, before it was called the elk hair caddis, we called it the trough caddis. And then it became the elk hair caddis. And that's a brilliant fly design. But he tied what came to be known as the American pheasant tail, or the trough pheasant tail, and this is tied with thread rather than wire. We're going to use some wire for rib, but I like to build up the thorax a little bit on this. Now you can build up the thorax with a little bit of fine lead wire or wading wire if you want to, but I do it with with just brown thread. I use, I'm going to unwrap this because I did something wrong here. I use Danville's Flymaster color number 47 tobacco brown, which is one of my very favorite thread colors. And what I just did there is I pulled more thread off my bobbin. So I've got, about 10 inches of thread. Now I'm going to start that again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull those two together like this. So I've got that doubled thread because I'm going to use the thread to build up that little football shape. And if I double the thread, I'm going to be able to do that twice as fast. Okay, so I'm going to build up that little football shape there. Not too much. Again, you can weight these with a little bit of wire, or a little bit of lead wire or whatever, and then finish by going back. Now, you can see I'm rusty because I did something wrong here. Didn't have my wire ready. So I'm just going to pull some of that same copper wire off. You can use gold wire on this. Gold wire works good on this. And actually, you can tie a Sawyer-style pheasant tail with gold wire, and that's what's known as a Ritz. It was Charles Ritz's version of this fly. So everything else is kind of the same, but what we can do with this, we can use a shorter pheasant tail. We don't have to use our good old long stuff. We can use a much shorter pheasant tail on this. And save our long stuff for something else, for the traditional version. So 3, 4, 5, 6. Trim that there. Count 2, 4, 6. Even them up a little bit. I used to tie these literally about 2,000 or 3,000 of these a year. And anybody who's tied commercially will say that's nothing, and it isn't, But I used to tie these, way too many of these. We're gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna use the thread to catch our tail in there. Oops, a little too short. Whoops, I dropped it. What's wrong with me? I'm gonna cut another section here. This got out of hand. So same thing, just catch those in, take a couple of turns, make sure they're nice and even. Okay, there we go. Now I've got my wire. Again, you can use gold wire, you can use silver wire, whatever you'd like, but keep the color scheme. And I'm going to put my wire in there. I'm going to tap it in, wind forward. Okay, and I'm going to just take this. I'm going to wind it right up to behind the thorax. I'm going to tie it off there. Actually, tie it off on top because I want that to use that. So I've got it tied off there on top. And I'm going to pull some good old, let's see, there we go. Good old peacock here. Okay. See how fluffy, I don't know, this doesn't show up really well, but this is nice fluffy peacock. So we're going to use that for the thorax.
You want to wind the wire before you tie the thorax?
Nope, because we're going to wind the wire over the thorax to reinforce it.
Good, okay.
Because remember, peacock pearl is very brittle, or very fragile, I should say. I'll wrap that in. I could, I'll trim that off. I usually just snap it off, but trim it off. And take my peacock. You can do it one of two ways. You can do it two at once or one at a time. But we'll just, you always want to wind a little bit back onto your wing case material. Okay. And give it a little pinch there. Take about 3 turns, and I'm just going to snap these off. If I snap them off, they'll actually break under the thread, so you won't have any butts. And then I'm going to take my wire, bring it forward. I want to make your last turn right tight there, and take a couple turns through that thorax there. Fatigue your wire, and then pull the wing case over the top. Start towards the eye and make about 4 turns back towards the thorax. And then put a 4-turn whip finish with your first turn right in front of the thorax. 2, 3, 4. And then instead of cutting these off, I'm going to take them each one at a time and snap them off. And that'll give us a pretty clean head. I could have put a little more peacock in that. It might have made it a little better, but you get the idea. And that's a trough pheasant tail. That thorax should be a little. What's that?
Do you find that one of them fishes better than the other, or doesn't really matter?
I'm an advocate of the simpler fly.
Okay.
It's just that you see this fly a lot, and I wanted to show it to you. You can also do this in a flashback version, okay, where you use flashback for the wing case. But you'll see this called an American pheasant tail or a trough pheasant tail. I don't. I like the traditional pheasant tail better myself. So, and then of course there's the old. I shouldn't even. This is like the devil's invention here. I shouldn't bring it out, but this is a very simple fly. Just the beadhead pheasant tail. And you can make these as elaborate as you want. I'm just going to show you how I do it. But I will show you the trick here is very simple. And it's how I mount a beadhead to a fly. It's probably a little different than what you've seen before. Now, when I do beadheads, I generally go to a 1X or 2X, I'm sorry, about a 2X long, and this is a 3761. It's a little bit longer than the 3769, and I do that to compensate for the bead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little copper bead on this guy. I don't fish beadheads often anymore. I do. I carry a few of them. Beadhead hares here primarily, but I don't carry a lot of them. But beadheads, they're very effective. Very effective. The problem people run into with beadhead is getting the beadhead to stay on. You can see how that beadhead is there. What I do one of two things. I either take very, very fine, we could use copper wire. In fact, maybe we will, to add a little bit more weight. You can use thread, or you can use lead or lead substitute wire if you have some fine diameter stuff like 10,000s. I couldn't find mine. I thought I had some, but I couldn't find it tonight. I'm still unpacking. So we'll use some copper wire. The reason I like wire, you can use thread, but the reason I like wire is slippery. So what I'm going to do, remember I made that football shaped thorax on that original pheasant tail. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to make kind of much like just a ball here. And then I'm going to push it forward into the back end of that. See that? See what I did? That just is going to hold that right on there. Okay, rather than have that flopping around and having to build up a lot of thread behind it to hold it. So I just did it with something that adds a little bit of weight and a little bit of stiffness there. So there's my bead mounted. Anybody ever seen that trick before? You just take your fingernails and just stuff that right up under there. See that? So that bead is held right in place there. And then this will probably okay. So take that guy. Again, we can use our shorter pheasant tail for this because we don't need as much length. Put a little tail in it. I've got some wire laying around here somewhere. Do I have enough for a rib? No. And this would be a good candidate if you wanted to use gold wire. If you want to mix things up a little bit, you could use a little bit of gold wire. I'm just going to tap that right in there. Get right up. And overlap it a little bit to get a little bit of, want to get a little bit taper to it. Getting that a little bit darker. Work that darker stuff in there. Don't worry too much about those wing butts there, or those butts there. Oops, no. Tie that in. Fatigue it off. Grab a couple more peacock curls here. Lay those right in there. Wind back. We can just snap these off. Should be able to just pop them off. There we go. Now, peacock has a high side and a low side. Has longer fibers on one side than on the other. So I like to use those long fibers, have those come up. That's why I was twisting that around a little bit. I'll do it on this one now too. There we go. You use your second one to kind of go in and add some, whoops. Well, when that happens, never broken a feather before, so it's the first time ever. Let's go back and correct it. I like breaking materials off rather than cutting them whenever I can. Because they'll break under the last turn of thread, so you get a nice clean trim there, rather than with the scissors where you can, it'll stick out past the last turn of thread. That looks a little better. Pop those off. One is I broke off a little. One of the most neglected and most important fly tying tools that I use are these tweezers, these fine point tweezers. Let's see if I can get them. These are I got these at Walmart. They're called Sally Hansen Perfect the Arch. They're eyebrow tweezers, and they're the I've had these for years. I think they're still available, but they're one of my my most used tools. And then when I put my whip finish in, I put my whip finish in right behind the bead. And what I'll usually do is do 3 turns and let that slide right past the bead and draw it in good and tight, and I'll work it back a little bit, and then put 3 more turns, 2, 3, and that'll hold it really well, and you won't see it. It makes a really nice clean, makes a really nice clean transition. And there you go. There's just a little bead head kind of pheasant tail thing. How's that look?
Very good, as usual.
But simple fly. Again, I like to keep them simple. That adds a little bit of flash. I tend to kind of like that when I've caught a lot of fish on that thing. I can make some criticisms on this. You can see right here where the body doesn't have much of a taper. I should have put a little bit of taper with the thread there to counteract that and make it look a little neater. But if anybody likes to catch panfish, bluegills, that'll murder them. Works through the ice too. I used to tie tons of them for ice fishing. So that's another thing you can do with those. Questions?
Anybody got questions or comments?
Well, I'll just say, John, thank you. It's always a real pleasure to watch you tie.
Oh, thank you. I next time, if you guys want, if we do this again, we'll do CDC.
Okay, so soft
Okay.
tackle?
Well,
Like that.
CDC is the Col de Canard dry fly stuff. And there's a few tricks with that makes it, it's one of my very favorite materials, and it's fun to work with. And I think a lot of people, I kind of got slapped recently online for saying that most people don't use it properly, but most people don't use it properly. But I could show you how I use it. And I won't say that I'm the only one using it that way, but it's often kind of used. It's not used to its best advantage, let's say, by most people. And that could be a fun topic.
Would be a good one.
Are these flies all the same size that you mentioned in the beginning?
You can tie these. I tied all these in 14s, just because that shows up well. You can certainly tie these. I tie them. I fish a lot of 16s. You can certainly tie them smaller than that. Once you start to get a little bit larger than that, you run in, especially if you're going to tie the traditional Sawyer, you run into a materials limitation with the length of the individual fibers. You can run into, they're very hard to get in that size. There's a couple of ways you can get around it. You can add some extra fibers under the thorax. You can tie them into the thorax, then pull those over to make the wing case. To me, it doesn't make as neat a fly, and I've seen a lot of commercial Sawyer style flies done that way. It doesn't look as neat. But what I've found is that they're most effective in 14s and 16s. Again, that's my experience. That's probably not everybody's experience. But a size 18 pheasant tail can be a very, very deadly fly. If you, and I think the pheasant tail, one of the reasons I like it so much is it's quite generic. It could be, it could look like a Hendrickson. It could look like a sulfur. It could look like a lot of things. I think it can also look like a midge, midge larvas. In fact, I used to just tie, I'll do one for you. This is kind of crazy, but I can do one more here. I'm almost embarrassed to do this, but I used to, I used to catch a hell of a lot of fish on it. This is a size 16, so we'll just go down one.
What are you doing?
And we're going to use the thread. And oops, I got to switch. Hang on. Sorry. There we are. Take about 3 or 4 pheasant tail fibers. 4 would be about right. Tie them in, little short tail, a little bit of wire. This is a good candidate for gold wire if you want to use it. Now I've tied pheasant tails with green wire, with gold wire, with red wire, almost anything you could think of. All works. If you like to mix it up a little bit, that's fine. But I'm just going to keep this body really pretty much the same diameter. Go right up the hook. Just keep that the same diameter. Trim that off. So we're going to do something here. Wrap your wire. Fatigue it off. Always fatigue wire. And I'm just going to grab one little peacock fiber here. You can do these. I've done these down to size 22s. Got a box of them somewhere. Anywhere you go where there's a lot of midges. One of the things we don't have in the Delaware is we don't have the midges that the Western rivers have. We do have some of them, but we don't have the Western midge fishing. Just the enormous amounts of midges that the Western rivers like the Missouri or the Bighorn or the Green or some of those have. Which the fish feed on constantly. The Western spring creeks are just, full of midges, and it's one of their main food sources. We just don't have it here. And this, I've caught ungodly amounts of fish just on that stupid little thing right there, right down to like size 22s. Just that simple little thing. It's just a very suggestive little midge pattern. You don't have to go get any crazier than that. It's a very, very effective little fly. If you like to fish like a small dry and dropper, this is a great candidate for that. It could suggest a Baetis nymph. It could suggest a midge. It could look like almost anything. So you can do a lot of things with pheasant tails. I use pheasant tail. Let's see if we can do it. We can do this. This is the magic of technology. Show you another thing I do with pheasant tail. Pheasant tail makes one of the very best spinner bodies that you could possibly ask for. And one of the very first red spinners or rusty spinners. This is one of the earliest dedicated dry spinner patterns, is that right there. With a pheasant tail body and fine gold rib. And then with a fully wound hackle, which you can trim to your liking on the river. That's a fairly good one. That's a 14. But you can also, you can tie them a lot smaller. A little rusty dun hackle here. These are very simple flies. Let's see if I can find one here for you. Very simple, very traditional fly that's kind of stood the test of time. And that's all you need for a spinner. You see how nice and glassy that hackle really shows up, how sparkly it is. But that body is a wonderful body for spent spinners.
Do you usually trim the underside of it when you fish it? So
Well,
that it
you know,
lays more in the film?
Yes. And one of the things about these, it's a little bit surprising, and you're spot on with that. One of the things that's surprising is that you see a lot of spinners that aren't, during a spinner fall, that are essentially acting like duns, except the wings are clear and sparkly. And I think that catches it. If I were, let's say, if I were fishing over a rising fish with an untrimmed fly, and I knew that it had gone over him correctly a couple of times, I might trim the bottom. I might start out with trimming the bottom and the top, but it's a very, very simple fly that over the years has just caught me, an awful lot of fish.
You
Just-
change that over to a lighter wire hook, right?
Yes, a dry fly hook. Yeah. Whatever dry fly hook you like.
Bruce Pensek from Virginia was asking if you might comment on the thoughts between the Sawyer pheasant tail and what role it might have played in the evolution of the teeny nymph.
No other evolution other than the material. Jim Teeny was using that essentially as a steelhead and cutthroat fly on the West Coast, and they were much larger. The Sawyer pheasant tail, the thing about it was made to be fished in a particular way. And what makes it so different than anything else is the design. It's an incredibly elegant design. It's really purpose built. It's not just a combination of materials. It's about sink rate. It's about the fact that there are no legs or anything. So when you do move it for the induced take method, there's nothing to make the fly spin or twist. It also has a really good entry. So when it hits the water, it sinks really fast. Now, this isn't a fly that we're going to try to get down 3 or 4 feet, but we do want it to get down to the fish's level. And the way Sawyer controlled that was by either greasing or degreasing his leader. So he would grease and when I fish these myself, I generally will grease the leader with a fairly thick paste all the way out to maybe no more than 2 feet from the fly. And I've even fished them with the leader greased no more than 6 inches from the fly. So that leader is basically going to hold that fly and keep it from sinking too deep. So we get to the level where the fish is. And again, these were flies that were developed to fish to visible fish so you can see the take, where the teeny nymph was more of a general purpose fly. He also used, he used to sell the materials and in packages of different colored pheasant tails. And his technique was very, very different. The fly designed for very, very different purposes. Where the Sawyer pheasant tail was made to sink rapidly to the fish's level, not too deep, and then as the fly was near the fish, you would lift the rod and create the movement, which the fish reacts to. It's almost kind of a, I don't want to say it's a method unto itself, and it's one I really go out of my way to try to use. The problem you run into is that we, here in the East, you have to have the right conditions, and they don't happen all that often. But if you go to like the Western Spring Creeks or the English chalk streams or things like that, you can fish pheasant tails all day long to visible fish, and that's kind of where they that originated. But that quick entry, that fast sink rate to the depth you want it. I think that's one of the reasons, this way off on a tangent, but I think it's one of the reasons that bead heads are effective. The fish see something dropping through the water column. And if you've ever stood on a bridge and tossed little pebbles to visible fish, you'll see them move 2 or 3 feet and eat the pebble. It's just a pebble. So I think the same thing kind of happens with bead heads. They're dropping through the water column and the fish see them and react to the movement.
I'm going to comment on teeny nymph. As I recall, it's an unweighted fly, and Teeny used to fish it on a sink tip line.
Right. Yeah. Again, retrieving it. He did a lot of lake fishing in the Northwest. When I was at Cortland Line, we sold a lot of his products. Nice guy, nice enough guy, certainly.
Does anybody else have anything to say before we let John?
No, I think that was great. John, are you going to be coming up to your place in Endicott soon?
I got to go over and talk to the mover tomorrow.
Well, at some time when you're up here, I guess we need, are you using the camera that I gave you, or did you convert?
Yeah, and I got to get that back to you.
Well, if you bring it up and just drop it off either with Nick or me.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, I can send you my address, but I think Nick lives right in Endicott. So, and your house is in Endicott, isn't it?
Yeah, Endwell, yeah.
Endwell, okay.
Yeah.
So you probably.
If you let me know, John,
I
when
will.
you're going, I can always meet you.
I will.
If you still have that box I gave you, just throw all the stuff in there.
I will do exactly that. No, I'll be over. I'll be over several times next week.
Yeah,
Okay.
So
there's
I'll
no
make
hurry.
sure.